know that the relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia was not that good. They didn't have practically they didn't have any relations. But it seems that they're going to reestablish their ties again. How do you see the role of Russia and China in this? And are they solidifying their power in Middle East?
Well, it's not so much about Russia and China solidifying power in the Middle East. They're liberating the Middle East. They're restoring China's sovereign direction, Saudi Arabia's sovereign direction to Saudi Arabia. Gone is the United States controlling the region through the threat of war and, defining the Middle East as an area of potential military confrontation. The United States has been promoting the Saudi-Iranian conflict for some time now. We've been the ones fueling it. We've been the ones encouraging Saudi Arabia to build a Gulf Arab coalition to confront the Iranians. We've been the ones seeking to isolate the Iranians. And, China came in and offered an alternative called peace. And they took it. Because I think the world, not just Saudi Arabia, but the world is getting fed up with American militaristic hegemony. War is not the answer. War is not the solution. Peace is. Cooperation, economic prosperity. Now, it's not going to be an easy thing to do. No one's trying to pretend that suddenly Saudi Arabia and Iran, after being on opposing sides for so long, are suddenly going to be the best of friends. But I think this shows that the United States is finished in the Middle East. It has no vision. Nobody's looking to the United States now for any vision of how to proceed. The day of central command dictating terms of coexistence is over. China came in and said, why don't you guys talk together? Why don't you normalize relations? Why don't we talk about how we can do business with each other, make everybody prosper? And that's the direction they've taken. So I think this is it's one of the biggest stories of the century. It's the end of the Carter Doctrine. It's the end of America's military domination of the Persian Gulf, of the Middle East, and it's the beginning of something new. An era where Middle East nations get to determine on their own the direction they want to head, and it appears that they want to pivot towards China and away from the United States.
And when Syria comes in, and we see that Syria is going to reestablish its ties with Saudi Arabia as well, Scott, when we see the far-right media in Iran, who were always against Saudis, they're part of establishment in Iran. They're always against Saudis, but they're literally applauding these new relations between Iran and Saudis, and these new relations between Syria and Saudis.
Again, what I said is the old way is over. The reason why Iranian right-wing media was opposed to Saudi Arabia is that Saudi Arabia was in the camp of the United States, and the United States is vehemently opposed to Iran. What they're applauding is Saudi Arabia making a determination that they will no longer allow Washington, D.C. to dictate their policies, dictate their future, dictate their national security. Saudi Arabia will do what's in the best interest of Saudi Arabia, and the best interest of Saudi Arabia is to divorce themselves as rapidly as possible from the United States. Saudi Arabia has a vision. Saudi Arabia 2030. It's a vision that doesn't include going to war. It's a vision that talks about transforming Saudi society and Saudi becoming a leader, an economic leader, and a cultural leader in the Persian Gulf area. And they can only do this if they peacefully coexist with Iran. And so I think that's what the Iranians are cheering. They're cheering the fact that Saudi Arabia has liberated itself from its American colonial masters. And Syria is part of the process, as you're going to see as the Saudis and the Iranians begin to work together. You're going to see, I bet, Hezbollah start to have good relations with the Sunni and the Christians in Beirut as Lebanon starts to heal. Because once you remove the animosity, the American-driven animosity between, Saudi-funded political elites in Lebanon and Hezbollah, which is backed by the Iranians. Once the Saudis and Iranians say, hey, guys, start working together, you're going to see peace. Look at Syria. Saudi Arabia was a major backer of the opposition. Saudi Arabia is now making peace with Syria. Syria, Assad went to the United Arab Emirates and was received there after his Moscow trip. I think what the world is seeing is that China and Russia are forces of positive energy. They don't want war. The world is tired of war. And they're not just tired of war, they're tired of being dictated to. This rules-based international order is something that the United States made up and then sought to impose on everybody. And then if people didn't want to play that game, they were accused of being disruptive. Disruptive to what? American hegemony? Yes, perhaps. But not to, when you decide to go out on your own and be your own nation, to do your own thing, that's how you serve your own people. And this is offensive to the United States, but the United States is finding out that it has no leverage. Look, what can it do in the Middle East right now? What can it do? Nothing. Israel's isolated. Everybody's turning away from Israel. In 2020, the Abrams Accord was instituted by the Trump administration as a way of getting Israel leveraged into the Gulf Arab community to create a Gulf Arab-Israeli coalition against Iran. That's dead. That's finished. That's done. Israel's out. Saudi Arabia and Iran are making peace. They're pivoting towards China. Russia is facilitating this. This is the future.
What does it mean to the future of energy and petrodollar?
Well, petrodollar is dead. It just doesn't know it yet, but it's dead. The Saudis are cutting deals with the Chinese in yuan right now, using Chinese currency. The Chinese are some of the biggest purchasers of oil. If they're purchasing oil using their own currency, the petrodollar is dead. It's finished. Goodbye. It'll take a little while for the world to purge itself of this, but we are looking at the collapse of the American empire. It's happening right in front of us. And to be honest, it's a beautiful thing. It's beautiful because the petrodollar hasn't brought anything other than greed, American dominance, hegemony. It hasn't been a force of good. The petrodollar is supposed to be, if it's going to be a force of good, it's supposed to be the reserve currency of the world, a force of stability. But the United States has used that to leverage dominance over people, sanctioning people, or in the case of Russia, stealing hundreds of billions of dollars, stealing, theft, straight up theft. No legal justification for it. The United States just stole it because they can. Now, if you're another nation, look at that going, wait a minute, you want us to buy into a system that's supposed to bring stability, but if we do something you don't like, you get to steal all our money. It doesn't work like that. It's finished. Goodbye and good riddance.
Scott, when this war started in Ukraine, I remember there was a debate between John Mearsheimer and Michael McFaul. In that debate, Michael McFaul was arguing that this war in Ukraine is Putin's war. Nobody's happy with what Putin is doing in Ukraine. No Russians is happy with that. And after just recently he tweeted something so differently. He said, no, it's not just Putin. It's all Russians together with Putin that are fighting Ukrainian and killing Ukrainian. Why he changed his rhetoric toward Russia?
You do know that Michael McFaul hates Russia viscerally. He claims otherwise, but he's a man who came into prominence in Russia during the 1990s after the fall of the Soviet Union. His sole function was to help the United States dominate Russia, to economically ruin Russia by stealing its resources, to destroy Russia politically by imposing what they called American democracy, but it was American hegemonic control over Boris Yeltsin. In the process, destroyed Russia. The decade of the 90s was horrific for Russia. Michael McFaul is part of the system that made that happen. He hates Russia, he hates Putin, and he wants to destroy them. Now, once you understand that, then everything he says makes sense. at that same debate with Mearsheimer, I think he was confronted with some inconsistencies of his statement. They said, well, you lied. He said, of course I lied. It's the real world. That's what we do. We lie. We lie. We lie. Michael McFaul's a liar. Nothing he says is the truth. Everything he said is a spin. He's not here to tell the truth. I mean, it's a shame. He's a professor at Stanford. Stanford's an institution of higher education, of learning, where, intellectual integrity should be everything. Michael McFaul is the exact opposite of intellectual integrity. He's a lying sack of manure. Everything about him stinks. And people just need to understand that. When he opens his mouth, he's not here to educate, to inform. He's here to spin data that's to the benefit of the system he serves. And the system he serves is a system built upon American domination of Russia. Well, that day's over. See, the reason why he's so anti-Putin is that Putin has humiliated him, has exposed him for the liar that he is, exposed him for the thief that he is, because his whole job is to steal from Russia, steal money, steal their soul by imposing what they call democracy, but it's really foreign control over the political opposition designed to bring down Russia, to hurt Russia, bring harm to Russia. Michael McFaul is a liar. You should not take anything he says seriously. His sole function is to undermine and destroy Russia. The good news is Russia's winning and Michael McFaul is losing. And that's a good day.
Scott, the other rhetoric that they were telling us since this war started, they were telling that Putin wants to subsume all of Ukraine. I wanted to know, has Putin ever been interested in conquering the western parts of Ukraine?
Putin's never been interested in conquering any aspect of Ukraine. I mean, there's a widespread recognition in Russia that the modern Ukrainian state is an artificial entity, and it is. It wasn't. It was created by the Soviet Union, plain up, straight up created by the Soviet Union, cobbled together to create this entity called Ukraine that, was an artificial nationality, an extension of Lenin's nationality policies. Stalin got involved in that, but it's a fake entity. Life was breathed into this notion of Ukrainian nationalism from a Soviet perspective in order to justify another vote in the United Nations. That's it. It's fake. Now, there is in Western Ukraine people who espouse a different vision of Ukrainian nationalism. And these are people like, who owe their ideological foundations to people like Stepan Bandera, Petulia, and others, these extreme nationalists who are literally white supremacists, who view this notion of Ukrainian nationalism as ethnic purity. They view anybody else as a subhuman. If you're a Pole, you're subhuman. If you're Russian, you're subhuman. If you speak Russian, you're subhuman. You have to have this Galician purity that they have. That's a different vision of nationalism. But Ukraine as a nation state is fake. But when the Soviet Union collapsed, Putin has also said the reality is Ukraine became an independent sovereign entity. It's fake, but it's there. We respect it. We're not happy about it. Crimea is a problem. We don't like that Crimea is in there. We have a large Russian population that we want to make sure that Ukraine does right by them. But Ukraine is Ukraine. Look at the Minsk Accords. Vladimir Putin participated in the Minsk Accords with the assumption that the sovereignty of Ukraine will be preserved. Now, if he's a man who wants to absorb Ukraine, as everybody says, he wouldn't have gone along with that. But for 8 years, he allowed the Minsk sham, the Minsk fraud, because that's what it was. We know that the West wasn't negotiating in good faith, but Putin was. And the whole premise behind it is that it is a sovereign entity. It's only after the coup of 2014, where the Ukrainians turned on the ethnic Russians and tried to steal Crimea, that Vladimir Putin stepped in. One, he said Crimea is Russia. He took it. Historically, he's correct. Legally, people can have that debate, on the legalities of that. But the bottom line is, 97% of Crimea wants to be Russia. They're Russia. And that will never change. But even then, he wasn't saying that Donbass had to be Russia. He was saying you just have to protect the rights of the people of the Donbass. He didn't even go with independence. He kept saying that they need to have autonomy, but they're part of Ukraine. Is that what a guy says who wants to take these territories? No. And even in the end, when they said, when in order to intervene legally, they had to become independent, Russia recognized that independence. When they met in 1 April in Istanbul to do the final treaty that was supposed to happen after the Russian intervention, the Russian position was that Donetsk and Lugansk would be independent, not part of Russia, but independent from Ukraine. That's not what you do if you want to absorb it. They only absorbed it after NATO armed Ukraine and attacked in September. At that point in time, Russia said, okay, all bets are off. We're holding a referendum. We're taking all the territories that we occupy because there's primarily a Russian population, and they absorbed it. But that was a measure of last resort. It wasn't their intent going in. Just like today, there's a lot of people saying that this war can't end until Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv are part of Russia also. But Putin's not articulating that. He's giving the Ukrainians a chance to bring an end to this conflict, allowing them to retain those territories. Is that what a man does who wants to absorb all of Ukraine? No. He's giving them a chance to bring an end to this conflict so that they can preserve what's left of their territorial integrity. But if they opt not to, if they continue to be used by NATO to attack Russia, then they're going to lose those territories. That is a guarantee. But it's not because Putin wants to do it. It's because he has no choice but to do it, because NATO is working with Ukraine to bring harm to Russia.
Scott, when you look at the wars that the US was involved in, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, none of them led to a desirable conclusion for the US. And my question is that, was any of these countries militarily comparable to Ukraine, what Ukraine was before this war? Any of these countries?
The Vietnamese were a very good army. We shouldn't denigrate them at all. The North Vietnamese beat the French. I just want to say that again. The North Vietnamese beat the French, and the French were backed by the United States. So let's not pretend that North Vietnam didn't have a good army. And let's not pretend that the South Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, weren't a very dedicated, effective fighting force. The Vietnam War was very, very hard. It wasn't a little war. It was a big war. Millions of people died. Millions of people died. So no, Vietnam was a big, big deal. It wasn't a stand-up conventional fight like we're seeing, but the terrain wasn't conducive to that. It was a bloody, bloody battle fought in the mountains, the valleys, the jungles, the fields of Vietnam. And the fighting was as intense as anything you're seeing anywhere. Look at the Battle of Hue City and see what happens when you have urban conflict. So Vietnam was a tough battle. Iraq, it's desert warfare. When the United States fought the Iraqi army in 1991, it was the fourth largest army in the world, 400,000 men. You're going to tell me that that's nothing? You're going to tell me that the army that beat Iran in an 8-year war is nothing? No, it was a serious war. Ask the tens of thousands of Iraqis who died. Was America joking? What we brought to bear in the Gulf War was the world's best army ever. In the history of the world, there was never an army better than the one that we deployed in Desert Storm. We had spent 2 decades perfecting this in the post-Vietnam era. We modernized it. We trained. We were prepared to fight the Soviets on the ground in Europe using combined arms tactics with the most sophisticated weaponry in the world. What we brought to Iraq was the world's most lethal killing machine. And then people say, oh, the war was easy because we won. We beat the world's 4th largest army that had just emerged victorious from a war with Iran. They were professional soldiers, the Iraqis. They weren't a joke. We beat them because we were better, not because it was easy. War isn't easy. War is very, very hard. Iraq and Afghanistan, 2 different things now. Now here we're talking about low-intensity conflict. When we started the conflict with Iraq, yeah, I don't think anybody can say that the Iraqi army that faced us in 2003 was a credible threat. Because from 1991, when we defeated them first time, until 2003, in that intervening time, they hadn't had a chance to rebuild because of economic sanctions. It was an army that languished, that was cannibalizing itself just to stay up. They didn't have modern weaponry. They didn't have modern communications. They didn't have an air force. They didn't have an air defense. And they were going up against the remnants of the world's greatest military. We were still very good. We just weren't as big as we used to because we were shrinking. But our military was still the best military in the world. Make no bones about it. The military that went across the line of departure in 2003, no one could beat us. No one could beat us. And so then people say, well, it was easy to beat the Iraqis. It wasn't easy. That was a tough fight. The Iraqis put up a tough fight. But they were fighting the world's best army. They lost. Afghanistan. The Taliban got beat by the world's best army. I mean, why do people denigrate this? Do you not understand how good America is? You know, there's a reason, you know, you don't have this kind of policy that we have, a militaristic policy, without being pretty darn good. You don't want to fight us. Even today, you don't want to fight us because we will kill you. If we mobilize and get the total power of our nation together, there's nothing that can stop us. Nothing that can stop us. We're killers. You know, the Russians are pretty good, but in the Russian heart, there's a human. In the American heart, there isn't a human. We're killers. Our entire nation's history has been predicated upon killing people. That's what we do, and we do it better than anybody else in the world. So, you know, did we lose in Vietnam? We lost politically. We lost politically. But we slaughtered the Vietnamese. Did we lose in the Middle East? We lost politically. But in every stand-up fight, we won. Nobody beats us. Nobody has ever beat us. Not in a stand-up fight. And nobody will ever beat us in a stand-up fight. Because we are killers. The good news is, politically, we're a mess. Politically, we're a disaster. We lose our wars politically. We lose our wars because we go to war. War is an extension of politics by other means. Simply killing people doesn't accomplish anything. You have to kill people for a purpose. There has to be a purpose to justify the effort so that other people buy into it, so you get a conclusion that is satisfactory. But we go to war for the wrong reasons. And therefore, we can't sustain it. Because even though we have a military that's very good at killing, we have a nation that's better at consumerism than that. We want to be comfortable. You know, it's sort of a dichotomy. We have this military that's all about killing. We're very good at it. We have a nation that's all about comfort. Well, killing and comfort don't come together. They're two totally separate things. So when the killing starts to become uncomfortable, we stop killing. We quit. We withdraw. Not because we were defeated militarily. No one can beat us. No one can beat us except ourselves. And that's the good news. Because we beat ourselves over and over and over and over again. And thank goodness we do that. Because America, you can't have this power that's running around bullying people. Because that's what we are. We're a global bully. We are really the worst country in the world, the way we act. We have the potential of being the best country in the world. But we're not. How we interface with the world is arrogance, hubris, and death. Why is it the number one ambassador for the United States is a military officer? Why is it when we talk about our relationships with the Middle East, it was Central Command that took the forefront? Our diplomats, the ambassadors, supported Central Command, supported the military effort because we defined our relationship in terms of war-making potential instead of economic prosperity, peace. War. That's how we define it. Africa Command is what leads the way. We go in with generals who meet with nations to talk about security. How does China lead? Do they go in with generals or do they go in with businessmen and diplomats and sit down and say, how do we peacefully coexist? How do we get along? How can we make something that's economically beneficial? Now, for a while, the world was buying into the American rhetoric that's, talked about threat here, a threat here. Everything's a threat. And so they said, well, protect us. And America came in to protect them. But after decades of being protected by America, people are starting to evaluate and say, well, we aren't safe. We live in a dangerous neighborhood, and the biggest danger in our neighborhood is America. Everything America touches dies. Everything. We don't grow anything. We don't build anything. Look at Georgia, little Georgia. We claim we want democracy for Georgia. We claim we want good things to happen to Georgia. But what we're doing, we're destroying Georgian society for what purpose? To create a second front against Russia. That's war. That's why I keep telling the Georgian people, stop. Stop. Walk away from us. We bring nothing but death. We will destroy your nation. Look at the Ukrainians. What good have we brought there in the pursuit of democracy? Nothing. There's nothing good about what we've done there. Look at Afghanistan. What good did we bring there? Nothing. Look at Iraq, how destroyed it is, how dysfunctional it is. That's because of us. Nothing good happened there. Look what we tried to do to Syria. Look what we did do to Libya. Everything we touch dies. Everything. But to sit here and pretend that somehow America can't fight, no. We'll kill you. We'll kill you. We'll slaughter you. That's what we do. That's what we're built to do. That's what America's all about. Dwight Eisenhower warned us, don't allow this to happen. Don't let the military-industrial complex hijack America. But we have, and now we have a political military-industrial complex blob that basically, in order to survive, has to feed off of conflict. So America exists to create conflict in the world to feed the blob. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's America's relationship with the world in a handbasket. We exist to create conflict. The conflict then feeds, allows the military-industrial complex to grow, and it empowers Congress with money and power. That's it. We are a cancer to the world. We are a cancer. Now, hopefully the world's starting to wake up. And one way you cure cancer is to cut off the blood supply. Petrodollar is the blood supply. Stop spending dollars. Walk away from the American economy. Brazil, walk away while you have a chance. Argentina, walk away. South America, walk away. Just walk away. Say no. Just say no. Back in the 1980s, we had a drug campaign where I think Nancy Reagan, Ronald Reagan's wife, would come on and, just say no to drugs. Well, the petrodollar is a global narcotic. Just say no. Walk away. You'll do yourself such a world of good. You'll be involved with people that don't want to dominate you, don't want to dictate to you, don't want you to get you involved in war, conflict. If our leading export is an F-35 fighter, we got a problem. We got a big problem.
Scott, they're talking about Ukraine offensive in spring, but they need ammunition, they need manpower to do that. How
they need an army.
That's my question is what? How many of those soldiers, those troops that were trained for 8 years by NATO, are still alive and can fight?
No, that army's dead. That army's gone. That army's buried, crippled, blown up. There's a new army. Ukraine right now has an army that they've reconstructed during combat, during war. It's an army that is capable of very limited tasks. They can dig holes in the ground, they can go into the ground, and they can die in the ground. That's what they're good at right now. Digging, going in, and dying. They die hard. They fight hard in that hole. But this isn't a maneuver army. It takes a lot to train a maneuver army. Now, there are certain aspects of the Ukrainian army that have been pulled out and sent to Germany, where they've received combined arms training, a couple battalions worth. And they're going to be equipped with this new European equipment, the Leopard tank, the Challenger tank, the Marder infantry fighting vehicle, the Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, maybe even the Abrams tanks down the road. They get these. So they come together. They're going to have this little group here. But this is a new entity. It's not big enough. It's not powerful enough. It's not trained enough to have any meaningful impact on the battlefield. All they'll do is die. That's literally all they're going to do. They don't have the artillery to back up this offensive. They're running out of ammunition. There's not enough ammunition. There's not going to be enough ammunition. The Ukrainian counteroffensive is, we should hope that it's fiction, because if it's fiction, then it won't happen and people won't get slaughtered. But what I do think is there's some reality to it. They have 2 to 3 brigades worth of new forces that are being mobilized with Western equipment and these trained troops, and they think that they can do something against the Russians. But the fact that you and I are talking about it means that the Russian general staff has been talking about it too, and they're not stupid. The bulk of the 300,000 troops that were mobilized have not been committed to the front yet. There's still entire divisions worth that are getting their final training. That's divisions versus brigades. When you attack, you want a 3-to-1 advantage. The Ukrainians will be attacking about a 1-to-6 disadvantage. You really think this is going to succeed? It's fantasy. And it's tragedy, because everybody that's in those attacking forces will die. All of their equipment will be destroyed. Will they kill a couple of Russians? Yeah. But they're not going to win. There's not going to be a Ukrainian counteroffensive worthy of the name. There'll be a brief period of time where the Ukrainians make a lot of noise, and then they all die, and they go back to doing what they're doing right now, is digging holes, going in the ground, getting killed in the ground.
Scott, the US opposed the ceasefire in Ukraine and rejected the proposals put forward by China to resolve this crisis. What's the plan in Ukraine for the US? What's the end game for them?
Well, the U.S. doesn't know, to be honest. I mean, they know what they want. They want a Russian defeat, but that's not going to happen. What they don't want is a Russian victory, and that is going to happen. But they haven't come to grips with that. You see, if we were a mature nation, we'd say, whoop, Russia won. How do we mitigate that damage? How do we, we've lost. How can we preserve as much as Ukraine is necessary, pull back, keep NATO intact, and then consolidate down the road, build for the future? That requires maturity. That requires a leader that's able to look people in the face and say, yeah, we got beat. We tried to do something, didn't happen. We got beat. We got to accept this. We're going to make a peace right now, and we're going to pull back, and we're going to see what's, in the future. We'll take a look at what we're going to do. That's called honesty. That's called integrity. But instead, we pretend that we can win. We reject the ceasefire because to do so would allow Russia to, legitimize its gains. So we're acknowledging that Russia's winning by that. It's not like we're saying, we don't want it because Ukraine's winning. What we're saying is we do it now, Russia wins. It's a victory for Russia, which means it's a defeat for NATO. So we're trying to hold out on some sort of hope that something happens, but we know that nothing's going to happen. They just did a 1 million round contribution where, have you ever seen the Jerry Lewis telethon? It was an old thing back in the day for muscular dystrophy. We used to watch it every Labor Day, and people call in with their pledges. Jerry Lewis would sing a song, bring out an act, and people would call in, and you see the number on the back growing, all the money that they're getting. But that's fake money because it's just a pledge. It's just me calling up saying, I pledge $100. Bing, it grows by 100. But until I give them $100, it's fake money. The money's still with me. They don't have it. So Europe's come together going, we pledge 1 million artillery rounds. Bing! Everybody's going, 1 million artillery rounds. They don't exist. Most of them have been produced because in order to get there, you have to build a production line. You have to fund the production line. The production line has to start producing the ammunition, which means it's not going to be ready for a year and a half. There's a smaller amount of ammunition. They're going to go around. It's like me pledging $100 and going into my couch, lifting up the cushions and picking up a couple pennies and go, well, I got $7.23 here. Here, take that. But I have to go and get a job and wait for my paycheck to come in to get you the rest. That's what the 1 million rounds is. It's fiction. It's fantasy. They'll put a couple rounds up front, but Ukraine is chewing through their ammunition right now. Why hasn't Bakhmut fallen? Bakhmut hasn't fallen because Ukraine is pouring artillery into the battle, slowing down the Russian advance, not defeating the Russians, but slowing it down. And all that artillery they're using at Bakhmut, that ammunition is supposed to be preserved for their counteroffensive. Because if those 3 brigades that they're building are going to have any chance of doing anything, They're going to need massive quantities of artillery to suppress and break up Russian defenses, to break up Russian counterattacks before they happen, to suppress Russian artillery fire so these forces can advance. But if you go into battle and you don't have the ammunition, the Russian artillery is going to slaughter you before you even get to the forward line of defenses. And once you get into forward lines of defenses, they're going to counterattack because you can't stop the counterattack. This is basic war stuff, man. This is War 101. Ukraine can't do this. They don't have any ammunition. We know it. We're faking it. We're making stuff up. What? I don't understand it. Why is Joe Biden's administration unable to accept the reality of what's happened? Why do we have to lie all the way up to the very end, especially when these lies result in the deaths of tens of thousands and eventually hundreds of thousands of additional Ukrainians? You know, in the old days, when you would lose like this, the honorable thing was to kill yourself. So if the Biden administration has any honor, perhaps we'll see mass suicide amongst the Biden administration. People just go out and do the honorable thing. Hang yourself, blow your brains out, do something. The other thing that would happen is that you would be held accountable by an international tribunal, like the Nuremberg Tribunal. And if that would happen, then we would see the majority of the Biden administration found guilty, and their necks would be placed in nooses, and they would be hung by the neck until dead because they are criminal. What we're talking about here is criminal activity. This is stuff that's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against the Ukrainian people. It's a crime against the Russian people. It's a crime against the world. But that's not the world we live in. The Biden administration, of course, will continue because it's part of an American establishment. And even when Biden gets voted out, we'll replace them with somebody who's just like Biden because they reflect the same warmongering principles that the United States has adopted as that which defines who it is and what it is today.
Scott, what amazes me when Bernie Sanders was fighting Hillary, he was making a lot of noise. He was saying that we are looking after peace in this world. He wanted end to the fight in Syria and everything he said. But now recently he said each and everything coming out of his mouth was the blood things, was the establishment things. It seems to me he wasn't part of the establishment, but now he's part of the basic establishment in the United States.
Bernie Sanders has always been part of the establishment. Bernie Sanders is a liar. There's a noose with Bernie Sanders' name on it. Bernie Sanders is a war criminal. He's a horrible human being. And what makes him even more horrible, he's not honest. When he was running against Hillary, he was lying to the American people. Lying. Had he become president, the Bernie that you see now would have been the president. They're all that way. Every single one of them. Because you can't govern this country and not be that way. Because this government's about the military-industrial complex. It's about the relationship between the military-industrial complex and Congress. It's about the corruption of money. Bernie Sanders is an inherently corrupt individual. He just was lying to us, and we were believing the lie. But now the true Bernie Sanders has emerged, and he's just as bad as Hillary Clinton. He's just as bad as Joe Biden. He's just as bad as every single one of them, because his core value is about American power. And American power isn't defined by economic prosperity. It's defined by military domination. That's who Bernie Sanders is, and we're seeing it now.
Scott, do you think that Germany was involved in the sabotage of Nord Stream pipelines? Because the German news broadcast ZDF reported that shortly before the explosions, a German Navy reconnaissance ship was in the area of the incident.
One of these days, the truth will come out. I think the Seymour Hersh's article in reporting is fundamentally accurate. I believe the United States did this. I think Tony Blinken is a liar. I hope that Congress holds him to account for the lies he told when he said the United States wasn't involved. He should be in jail for the rest of his life. So should everybody who planned this operation. But the United States did it. But, we had a lot of help. And we see in the cover-up right now that German intelligence was involved in the cover-up. I think German intelligence was aware of what we were doing. I don't think that it could have been done without their knowledge. I think, I don't know if Schultz knew it was happening when it was happening, but he knew it was going to happen. He was there when President Biden announced it, in the White House with Schultz present, basically saying, we don't care about Germany, we don't care about German sovereignty, I'm going to shut down Nord Stream 2. He said it right in front of the German chancellor, and the German chancellor didn't shut him up. What kind of man is that? What kind of man, what kind of national leader is there listening to another person saying, I'm going to attack you. I'm going to attack Germany. He should have said, no, you're not. If you do that, we'll sink every one of your ships. If you do that, we'll kick your embassy out. If you do that, we'll kick all your military out. Who the hell are you to talk about to me? I know this is the White House, but you can't talk to me like that. I'm the leader of Germany. You can't sit there and say these things. If you're going to say that, then we're not friends. We're not allies. I'm leaving. Goodbye. That's what he should have done. But Olaf Scholz is not a real man. He's a puppet, a poodle, a wimp. There's other worse words I can use, but I won't. But, he's not a man. Olaf Scholz is not a man. He's not a leader of Germany. He's a tool of America. And his intelligence services are the same. They always have been from the very beginning. When the Gehlen organization, which is a Nazi intelligence organization that was running human assets in the former in the Soviet territories, formerly occupied by Germany, their number one network was the Bandera network. Those Nazis, run by Gehlen. Gehlen got absorbed by the OSS, which became the CIA. So all of his sins as a Nazi were forgiven. All the sins of his SS thug intelligence officers were forgiven as long as they continued to work with the Nazi Banderas to kill Russians, disrupt Ukraine. That's German intelligence in a nutshell right there. It's a Nazi organization. Its fundamental foundational reason to exist is to preserve a Nazi hierarchy in the former Soviet territories. The United States has controlled German intelligence from day one. It operates separate from the German government. They work for us, not for the German government. And how could you possibly work for the German government? Olaf Scholz, you can't work for a poodle. You can walk a poodle. You can pet a poodle. You can groom a poodle, but you can't work for a poodle.
Scott, when we look at the U.S. national security strategy, when we look at it deeper, we see that it was always the case since the collapse of the Soviet Union, this division between democracies and autocracies. Do these guys, so-called blob, believe that democracy is exportable or importable?
First, I don't believe in democracy. It's a word. That's all it is. It's a word. We throw it out there. But we don't believe in democracy because we couldn't have what we have if this was genuine democracy. And I'm not talking about Athenian democracy. I'm just talking about basic Jeffersonian democracy, where the people have the ability to express their will and desire through an election to elect people to higher office that operate in their name. The election system has been taken over. Who voted for the Democratic Party? I mean, the National Committee. Not me, not anybody around me. They just sort of exist, and they get to pick who represents. And the same thing with Republicans. So when the average American citizen goes to the ballot, they're looking at names that they had no choice in putting there. They were put there by others. That's how the system, that's not democracy. And those people don't work for the American people. They work for the dollar. And the dollar comes from defense industry, from special interests, from pharmaceuticals, from big oil, all the things that aren't about the people. There's a disconnect between the real power structure and the American people. Yeah, we get to go to the poll every once in a while and put the print that says legitimacy because the American people voted. But who are we voting for? In local elections, yes, we get to have a say who gets to be our town supervisor and all that stuff. As we move up the ladder, though, through county elections and all that stuff, by the time we even get to state elections, we're no longer in charge because the system has taken over. The system, the blob has taken over, and the blob is presenting us people. And those people serve the blob. Whether they're called Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. They serve the blob, and the blob exists forever, whether it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration. And it's there, this ridiculous, nebulous, stupid entity called, American leadership. What is it? What does it stand for? It doesn't stand for democracy. What we export isn't democracy. Democracy, first of all, can't be exported. It can only be grown from within. If it's being exported, it's not democracy. It's being imposed on you. It's colonialism. But if you grow it from within, then it can be democracy, but then we can't control it. You see, and America's about control. That's all we want to do is control. That's why, again, we go to the Republic of Georgia. Do they not understand what's happening? You see, they're desperate for money. They're desperate for financial assistance. So when the United States Agency for International Development comes in and they dangle $40 million worth of developmental funds, the Georgians say, please, please, please. But how do we spend it? We don't give it to the government and say, here, figure out how to help your nation, how you can best help your nation. No, 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 no. We don't want that government there. We don't want Georgia Dream because it was put together by a billionaire who made his money in Russia. And my God, we can't have that, even though the Georgian people elected them. What we have to do is, in the name of diversity, create new social structures at the grassroots level, social structures that are independent of the Georgian government. And then we empower them through electoral reforms. We go in and change the laws, not in a way to preserve democracy, but to empower the grassroots movement to lift them up. And then we go in and we control the press. You see, we talk about resilience against disinformation. But what that means is that we suppress dissent. It's not about suppressing or opposing disinformation. It's about suppressing dissent. Anybody who dares speak out against what the United States is doing is guilty of disinformation. So we suppress them in the name of dissent. We do that by this huge propaganda effort. We control the media. And now what we've done is we created the building blocks that'll push this grassroots thing that we funded, we created up to the top, replace the government at the top. That's called a coup. It's a soft coup. We call it color revolutions, but that's what's happening in Georgia right now. Now, they tried to fight against it. How? They simply asked the question, anybody who received more than 20% of your funding from a foreign entity has to register and tell us who gave you the money. Now, we have that law. The European Union wants to have that law because it makes sense. That's how you fight against outside control. But if it's good for America, where we say we have to have it to protect American democracy, why can't the Georgians have it? No, you're not allowed to have transparency, because the moment you have that transparency, everybody's going to go, wait a minute. All you guys don't work for Georgia. You all work for America. You're doing America's bidding. This isn't about empowering Georgia. This is about empowering America to take over Georgia. So they had to shut it down. That's how America helps. That's what American democracy is when we export it. It's not about building democracy in Georgia or them by owning them, and then having them do our bidding when and where we tell them to do it. That's not democracy.
Scott, the last question. Do you think that the U.S. foreign policy gonna change considering what's going on between Russia and China and what's going on in Middle East, in Africa?
I don't know. It's going to be very difficult because we have the blob. We have a system that, eventually it's going to have to change because reality dictates outcomes. But in the short term, no, because we don't have, in order for policy to change, you have to have people capable of thinking. Right now, we don't. We have an academic institution that rubber stamps robots that feed into the system to do what the system has dictated. It's no longer about free thinking. When I went to college, we're very conservative American society, but college was very liberal. You went to college and you were taught to challenge everything. Think, learn, challenge, so that when you went into the system, you were kicking and screaming. Now, eventually the system wears you down. You get married, you have to have, you have kids, you need to, and so you conform. But initially you're out there, you were the rebel against the world. Today, we don't produce that. We produce robots. First thing we do is we suck the soul out of them by making them go in debt to the tune of $100,000+ to get an education. Okay, so now they're in debt, which means they have to get a job. But the only job they can get is the one the establishment defines for them. So in order to get that job, they have to play the game. They have to go in and conform. No more thinking, no more screaming, no more kicking. Conform. challenge anything that opposes you, dissents as disinformation. And so these people then go into the system, and their job is to perpetuate the system. Now, that's fine and dandy if the world is a relatively stable world. And what I mean by that is a world that has lends itself to America's war, chaos to feed foreign policy. But when the world rejects that, as they just did in the Middle East, and say, we don't want to be a center of chaos anymore. We want to be a center of, prosperity. We want to cooperate, not confront. We have people who can't handle that because they're robots. They have never learned to think. They only know how to do what the system tells them to do. And now they're looking at the Middle East going, that does not compute. That does not compute. They don't know how to think about peace and prosperity. And so for a while, the United States is going to be pushing back. We're going to try and prevent peace from breaking out by creating conflict. We're going to go in there and attempt, as we are in Georgia, to do these soft coups, to remove the people who dare stand up to us. Watch, I guarantee you we're going to be targeting Saudi Arabia in the next 5 years. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. We're going to be creating a Saudi opposition to get rid of Mohammed bin Salman. 100% guaranteed. Why? Because we never allow a nation to step out on its own, especially when they've been under our umbrella. You're not allowed to leave. Not allowed to leave. So we're going to be going after him. Will we succeed? We could in the short term, but in the long term, no. We're going to fail, just like we always fail. Not because we get beat militarily, but because we have dumb, stupid political ideas that are incompatible with the rest of the world. The world is changing. The world has changed. And at some point in time, we're going to have to change. At some point in time, people are going to say, that way didn't work. The Michael McFalls need to be thrown into the trash bin of history, and we need new thinkers to come out and get us to be better plugged in over here. And then we'll start to produce thinkers, we'll start to produce people who are capable of recognizing the world as it is and trying to adapt America to better fit into that world. And hopefully that'll be done in a way that doesn't promote conflict, but promotes economic prosperity, peaceful coexistence. But man, that is a fundamental change that has to take place. And it's going to have to happen from the American people. The American people are going to have to, because I told you, as long as we are comfortable, we don't want to rock the boat. That's why our leaders get to do anything they want. They get to lie to us. We don't care if we're lied to. How many Americans lost sleep when Tony Blinken answered that congressman? No, sir, we had nothing to do with Nord Stream 2. And Americans went, oh, okay, if Tony Blinken says so, it must be so. But we don't care because we can still go out to a restaurant. We can still go to Best Buy and buy some electronics. We can still do this, that, and the other thing. We're comfortable. But if we're uncomfortable, and the reason is because of high energy prices brought on by stupid policy, and Tony Blinken says that and the congressman doesn't respond with a question, we're going to say, hey, you got him there. Ask a follow-up question. Don't accept at face value. He's just saying no. Demand documents. Do a subpoena. Do an investigation. That's your job as congressman. If you're not going to do your job, we're going to put somebody in who can. He said, well, you can't because I'm part of the blob. We don't believe in the blob anymore. The blob has failed us. You see, because the blob has a duty and responsibility to the American people to keep us comfortable, to dumb us down with comfort. And if we start becoming uncomfortable, if we start questioning, how we're going to live the next day or two, the blob has failed. When the blob fails, we're going to find a replacement for the blob. So that has to happen. And I think it's going to start to happen because we are looking at the fall of Rome right now. Rome didn't fall over in one night, but what we're seeing today is the modern day version of the collapse of Rome. America is Rome. We are collapsing. The empire is collapsing. The rules-based international order is collapsing. The petrodollar is collapsing. American military-based hegemony is collapsing. And as it collapses, the American people are going to pay the price. We're going to become uncomfortable. And then then American democracy will kick in. Then we will vote the bastards out and we'll get new people in. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time. It's going to be painful.
Thank you, Scott. It's always a pleasure.